Well, good morning, everybody. This is Beth Weaver, and you don't have sound, or hopefully you have sound now. Welcome to the webinar. It is, of course, Wednesday, October 21st, and it's Beth Weaver here, and we're going to be covering the Book of Style as per my way. And today we're going to be covering the Chapter 11, as I mentioned, there we go. As I mentioned, or as you saw in the title, and thank you for joining me today. So we're going to jump right in. I love this picture. As some of you know who have been following along with this Book of Style kind of series that I've been doing, we've been showing gems, and I came across this one and I just loved it. I just can't stop looking at it, really. So we're going to jump right in. Thank you again for joining me. Generally what we're going to be doing, of course, is the Book of Style, and we're going to go through essentially just almost page per page, or just component by component in the Chapter 11. And then as some of you hopefully we'll have time to do a test your knowledge. If not, I can I do have this PowerPoint that I can send to all of you, and it is included in that PowerPoint too. So we will hopefully get to some test your knowledge, a little quiz situation at the end. All right. So let's just jump right in. For those of you, I'm sure some of you have your Book of Style either electronically or in print, and I'm going to have mine here in print as well. And we're just going to go right through it. It starts right out with percents. And again, we're going to go fairly, we're going to move right along here because, of course, we do have an hour, but there's lots of material to cover, and some of it's fairly straightforward. Actually, most of it is straightforward, but we do want to cover it all. Okay, so as I mentioned, today we're talking about percents, proportions, ratios, and ranges. Lots of stuff. And it starts right out, the very first section of course is about percents. And as you can see on the screen here, it's pretty much, it's pretty straightforward. And when they talk about abbreviations or the abbreviated version of percent, they mean, of course, that they're using, as you can see here, percent is all one word. When you have to write it out, it's not percent, as in two words there, you see the space, and that you are always to use the percentage symbol with numerals. And as usual, no space between the percentage sign and the numeral. That might seem like that's common sense, one would think, but to this day I still actually see spaces between the percent sign or the percent symbol and the number, if you can believe it. So just be mindful of that. We're saying it it is obvious, but we're saying it because I have actually seen it, and I've seen it in practicum even, practicum reports even. So that's pretty straightforward. And here are some examples, of course, and you can see here very clearly that the percent symbol is right next to the number or the numeral. So 13% monos and bands, that has to do with your white blood cell count, or your blood cell overall, your differential, and so on. So, and you can see there she has had a 10% increase in weight since her last visit. I made a note there too, as they do in the Book of Style. It actually says use numerals for the number preceding the percent sign. Again, this seems fairly obvious, but you actually don't write out, as you can see there, the word 50 and then use a percent sign. Seems fairly straightforward again. And you can just chime in with your questions as usual with me. I'll just ignore you. No, I'm kidding. You can chime in with your questions and we'll answer them as we move along. Sorry, I'm going to make sure. There we go. I can see everybody. Great. Okay. I'm going to actually bring this out. There we go. So I can see. Okay, so there we go. Again, sorry, I'm just stopping just for a second here because I have to manipulate my box. Okay, let's move right along. Sorry. One thing I wanted to mention, and again, we are pretty much going through the Book of Style here, almost word for word, but so, you know, stop me at any time if you have questions. We're going to get into some real meaty stuff later, but we're going to be moving along fairly quickly. So note here that it is common and acceptable for percent to be dropped, the word percent or the actual symbol to be dropped in dictation. And as with the case here in our verbatim environment with CanScribe, you use the expression that is dictated and don't convert. And there's an example below there that shows you when polys, it can be represented any one of those three ways. For example, it might be dictated as polys 58%, or it might be dictated as polys 0.58, or polys 58. So as you can see there, it is common and acceptable for that percent symbol to be dropped in dictation, but you use whatever is dictated in whatever way that it is dictated, generally speaking. Now, I'm sure there are exceptions, but according to the Book of Style and generally speaking in our verbatim environment, you are to type as dictated, okay? Okay. And here we're talking about spelling out, again, straightforward, but it says when the number is spelled out, like at the beginning of the sentence, you write out the word percent, and that's fairly straightforward. 50% of the patients were given a placebo. So obviously, again, you could reword it. The patients, well, that would be a weird way to, it would be fairly difficult. Not difficult. You could recast that, but really we want to stay as close to the verbatim environment as we can. So this would certainly be acceptable and almost preferred there. So you actually type out the word 50% as well of the patients were given a placebo. So when the number is actually spelled out as it would be at the beginning of the sentence, you write out the word percent. Ta-da! Okay. Here's what, that's true, Jude. Yeah, you could say a placenta, was given to 50% of the people. That's true. However, again, you want to stay as close to verbatim as you possibly can, generally speaking, because of the verbatim environment, okay? Ranges. Now, this is where often people get tripped up, and when it relates to ranges in with percentages, ranges for hyphens, ranges for all kinds of things. And I found it interesting. I want to just read it because it was a great sentence, and it's at the beginning. Sorry, I'm just going back a little bit. At the beginning of the chapter, and they're talking about percents and ratios and all that stuff, and it actually says this is a critical component or content to the medical record, and I would agree with that. And because of the fact that a lot of these information, the information that's presented as a percent or a proportion or a ratio or in ranges, are part of the not only the medical record but part of the clinical results that you will be transcribing. And so knowledge, this is what it says, knowledge of the clinical context will help guide you as in the MT, in applying the standards that you're learning about here. Knowing whether the dictated phrase 2 to 3 should be expressed as a number 2 with a TO, 3, 2-3, or 2:3 will depend entirely on the MT's awareness of the context in which this phrase is dictated and whether a range or a ratio is being referenced. So you can see here, we always often talk about context and how it's dictated and all that stuff. So you can appreciate, or maybe you haven't yet, but you will see how really context and critical thinking, even with simple things such as, percents and proportions, will actually help you to identify just exactly how to format things. And this might seem like small potatoes, and for some it is, but it really is important to get this type of formatting correct, because it can result in a critical error, or it can result in, for example, misrepresenting the information and so on. So I just wanted to underscore that because I thought it was a great sentence and a great context that we all should be aware of. I'm going to bring my chat box up here, sorry, just in case I'm missing you guys. Okay, so you can see here we're talking now about percent still, so we're still talking about percents in ranges. So in a range of value, repeat the percent symbol or the percent word, depending upon the context, with each quantity. And it makes a reference there, and we'll see it later, you'll see. So here it says values range from 13% to 18%. So the very top example there is the correct one. That is to say that you include the percent symbol with the range, or with ranges. Okay, so you can see there that you wouldn't say 13 with a TO without the percent sign in the first one, nor would you use a hyphen there. It's not appropriate. Okay, so essentially you're carrying through the percent symbol, or I guess if you have to write it out, which would be odd if you're using a numeral, you would carry out the percent word as well. I guess the only other time that you could possibly do that is if, for example, 50%, as Jennifer and a few of you just asked about, if it were at the beginning of the sentence and you had to type it out, say 50% of the patients received a placebo, so 50 to 60%, for example, of the patients received a placebo. It would be odd to actually show the 50 being written out and the 60 written and so on. So in that case, you would carry the word percent through. That's what I'm referring to, actually, Patricia. So in our example where you had to write out 50, like F-I-F-T-Y, at the beginning of the sentence, and therefore you also have to write out the word percent. If it said 50 to 60%, I would actually I guess for consistency, you would write out everything, because you have to write out the 50. However, I suppose it wouldn't be wrong if you put you typed 50, the word 50, and then TO, and then the 60%, but that would look odd, and it would misrepresent the information. You can imagine visually if you actually typed the word 50, but included the numeral of 60, it would look that your eye would immediately be drawn to the 60%, and that's not entirely accurate. So in that case, I would use the words and type out the words 50 to 60 and percent as well, just so that you don't misrepresent the information. You can see how that would actually, that's a great example of possibly misrepresenting information, just not because you're incorrect necessarily, but because of how the information is presented. So just remember critical thinking and think of context and how that will be represented in the record. And if it's correct. So here we are, again, just to reiterate, in ranges, we carry through the percent symbol or the word percent. And Patricia's saying, to clarify, could we go 50%? Sorry, Patricia, I just lost your chat there. I'm going to bring it back up. Could we say 50, as in she's typed out the word 50% to 60%? Yes, I suppose you could do that too. Yep, that's a good point, Patricia, just because then you've covered the waterfront, as my great aunt would say. You've covered the waterfront there, so you've actually represented it numerically, but also narratively as well. Although then, yeah, it's getting a little cumbersome, but that wouldn't be, that wouldn't be incorrect. Yeah. Okay, right, okay, so of course, as always, there's an exception. There we go. Oh, look at that. So you would see here, just as a note and the exception, you wouldn't actually, as we've been saying, of course, you wouldn't say 50 to 80%. You would actually say 50% to 80%, the words. Okay. Any questions there? Just carry on. So we're going to continue on. Still in percentages. So 11.1.4, percentages that are less than 0. Again, this seems fairly straightforward, so we're going to be zooming right through here just so that we keep rolling. So it actually says, of course, when the amount is less than 1%, place a 0 before the decimal. Now, of course, this is all in the context and keeping in mind the rules that also are outlined in the dangerous abbreviations in terms of trailing zeros and preceding zeros, okay? So if you have a percent that is less than 1%, so half a percentage point, for example, we have to put a 0 before the decimal. So it is 0.5% and not 0.5%. Even visually there, you can see how that actually could easily get misrepresented as 5% there. So that's kind of an easy one to remember. And then it says, alternatively, with whole numbers, avoid following the number by a decimal point and a 0, again, for the same reasons that it could be misrepresented. Now, it can be used or dictated if it is important to express exactness, and sometimes that is true. For example, with hemoglobin A1C, for example, or well, that's one that immediately pops up, but there are other examples as well. And it says, use if dictated, but be mindful of dangerous abbreviations and trailing zeros rules. Okay, so there, as you can see, again, 5% typically would be represented as 5, and the percent symbol not 5.0. If it is dictated, however, for whatever reason, if the physician is trying to indicate exactness, then you would have to include it if it is dictated. Okay, generally speaking, we want to not include that decimal in the 0.0 because, as you can see, that could easily get misrepresented as 50%. Okay. Coralie is saying, I had a dictation where the doctor dictated 0.0% and it had to be dictated verbatim. Yeah, and there's probably a very good reason for that too, Coralie. I don't know if it's been in the course necessarily. It could be, but yeah, if it's dictated, again, you need to transcribe that exactly because there's probably a reason. There would be, obviously we wouldn't normally say 0.0%. That is a great example of there had to be a reason why he or she dictated it that way, and in which case then you have to type it if it's dictated. Okay, moving on. And again, this seems fairly obvious, but it's worth stating. Use decimals and not fractions with percent. So if a 0.5% is dictated, you would say 0.5%. So use the decimal, not a fraction, with percent. So you wouldn't say 1/2 as in the fraction percent. And even it looks visually wonky anyway. That could easily get misconstrued, and often in many platforms, use of extra or unusual, the virgules, the forward slash, and even hyphens and so on, there's a movement away from it just because it can tend to not translate properly. So use decimals, not fractions, with percents. Okay, now we're moving right along to the second element of the topic here, and we're talking about proportions. And I just thought I'd put in the definition, and it's fairly straightforward. It's a special type. A proportion is a special type of ratio, expressing a relationship between the part and the whole. When expressed as a fraction, the numerator represents a portion of the total, and the denominator, or the one on the bottom, is the total. Fairly straightforward, but sometimes that can help you. Even knowing definitions of terms can sometimes even help you with formatting, believe it or not. Okay, so it says numeric expression. So when we're talking about proportions now, you always use numerals in expressions of proportions. So you can see here, and I know you're going to have questions about the last two. 5 parts dextrose to 1 part water. Of course, you're gonna use numerals anyway because that's kind of where you likely would land anyway due to the number formatting and account specifics. And you can see there the CD4 plus count was 200 per microliter, and there's a whole other set of rules that are coming into play there as well. But the point is that you're using numbers in expressions of proportions, and that's just fairly intuitive anyway. Pain was 4 out of 5, so meaning out of 5, the total being 5, the pain was 4. And then you'll see there 4 out of 5 physicians. So that's fairly straightforward and not necessarily bringing even other rules that do come into play there. The bottom line, the point here is that you use numbers to express proportions. So you wouldn't type out the word 4 out of 5 there because of the fact that it's a proportion. The pain one, I mean. Like you wouldn't type out the number 4, F-O-U-R, out of 5, F-I-V-E, which we wouldn't anyway. Coralie has a question, and she's saying, what if the doctor specifically says 200 per MCL or microliter? Well, we're going to get there. We're going to get there, Coralie, so just hold that thought because there are rules that we're going to get to that will determine whether you use that virgule or not. Okay, but here we're just talking about it just in terms of proportions in general. You use numerals. The point is that you don't spell out the number. Okay, so we'll incorporate some of that. Lana's saying, why is it the 4 out of 5 physicians and not 4 out of 5? Because it was probably dictated, and we're going to get there too, because of the fact that he used 4 out of 5. And same was pain, 4 out of 5. It could have used over, and that's why I said I knew you were going to have questions there, but we're going to get there. Okay. And 4/5, because see, in answer to your question, Lana, because it could be misconstrued in that case as 4/5, which isn't quite the right thing. Okay. This wasn't necessarily starting a sentence, by the way. I know Anne and other of you probably were thinking that, but it's not necessarily that this was starting a sentence. If it were, then you probably have to recast it just because you have to make the point correctly there. So if it did start out 4 out of 5 physicians voted yes for antibiotics, you'd probably have to recast the sentence there just to make it accurate. Or I suppose you could actually, in theory, type out the word for, but this is what they're saying here is that you're supposed to use numerals just because of visually you want to represent what they're trying to say. So you'd have to really think of context in the case that if this were to start out the sentence, but likely recasting and staying as close to the verbatim or what was dictated would be likely more appropriate in this particular case. But again, context is everything. So the idea is that you want to represent the information as clearly and as accurately as possible. So in that way, you might want to recast, but context. So good question, but the answer is dependent on the context in which it was dictated. So let's move on, just because I think some of your questions will be, oops, sorry. So here we're talking about now proportions again with the word per. So it actually says use a virgule or forward slash for the word per when the following conditions have been met. 1, when there is at least 1 metric unit of measure and at least one element includes a specific numeric quantity. So there has to be, both of these have to be met. So there has to be at least 1 metric unit and there has to be at least 1 number. So you can use a virgule for the word per when there's at least 1 metric unit and when there is at least 1 numeric quantity. Okay? So, in answer to your question, Coralie, even though a doctor might dictate per, for example, 200 per, as in the word, there's no other way that you can dictate. Well, there is. I guess he could say front slash or virgule or whatever, but you can actually, you'd be well within your formatting rights to type, as long as the rest of the context made sense, 200 / or virgule MCL, microliters. Yeah, because both of these conditions have been met, because the metric unit of measure is being used and there's a numeric quantity attached to it. So you can see in the examples here, so the blood volume was 70 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. So there is a unit of measure and there is a specific numeric quantity, same as in hemoglobin level was 14 grams per deciliter. You'll see that all the time, by the way. So there is a metric unit being grams and there is a specific numeric quantity. So per can be used. Those are fairly straightforward examples, but you'll see underneath, of course, the exception. Hemoglobin levels are reported in grams per deciliter. Sorry, there should be a period there. And why is that? Because if you look at your rules that have to be met in order to use a virgule for the word per, it has to be that there's at least 1 metric unit of measure. Well, that's true. There's grams per deciliter. They're both actual metric, but there has to be at least 1 number. There is not. They're talking in general terms there. So you can't use, you can't say grams per deciliter. You can't do G virgule DCL, for example, or DL. Okay, I think that's fairly straightforward. So remember, there has to be a number and there has to be a metric, at least for this rule. Now again, other rules might come into play, but when we're talking just straight up, whether you're trying to figure out whether to use a virgule for the word per, 2 things have to be met, and those are the 2 things. And if they are, then generally speaking, you should be okay to use them. Okay? And we're going to see some more examples hopefully, I hope we're going to be able to get to the test your knowledge too. Okay? We're going to get there, Jennifer. Just hang on. She's asking why paying 4 out of 5 is acceptable. It's totally acceptable, and you're going to see why. A lot of people get hung up in seeing that rule that relates to ranges, thinking that it relates to everything, and it doesn't. So wait for it. Hang on is coming. Okay. When non-metric units of measure are used, you have to spell out the word per, and you cannot use the virgule. Okay, so as you can see here, heart rate was 120 beats per minute. Why is that? Because beats is not a metric unit. Minute isn't either. Milligrams here, she takes 5 milligrams of Valium per day. Well, milligrams is there, and there is a number, but when it's in relation to per, day is not a metric unit. You cannot do per day, as in /day. She weighs in 3 days per week. Same again. So there's days and week are not metric units. So you would not be able to put 3 days /week according to this Book of Style reference. Okay. I have a question from Susan who says, hi, we spoke earlier about numbers. On the previous slide you have there is at least one metric, at least one element. What's the difference? Sorry, let me go back. Sorry. Yeah, we're going to, I'm trying to remember our conversation, Susan, but let me just ask your question and try to answer your question here. You say there is at least one metric unit and at least one element. There's a numeric, so there's one metric unit. They're not talking about numbers there, Susan. There has to be at least one metric unit, a metric unit, let's put it that way, a metric unit. So in both of these examples, milliliters and kilograms are metric units, but there also has to be at least one number, or an element includes a specific numeric quantity. So that's why there's a numeric quantity related to this per, and there's a numeric quantity and metric. There are two things that are involved there. And see, for here, as you can see, grams per deciliter, there is a metric unit there. Well, there's two, really, but there's no number, so you could not use the virgule for per there. And then here, again, just to go back, non-metric units, so beats per minute, per day, per week. None of those are none of those are metric, for example. Yes, there are numbers involved there, yes, but there are no, here you couldn't actually, because it's talking about the per day. And if there's a non-metric unit used at all, you have to use the word per. Okay? Now, of course, look at that. Look, there's an exception. Use a virgule when the expression combines a metric unit with a non-metric unit. So when you have, for example, 10 micrograms per minute while she was in the ER. Her IV was set to run at 10 micrograms per minute while she was in the ER. So micrograms is the metric unit, minutes is the non-metric unit. There is a number as well. So you're allowed to use the virgule for the per. And that seems like it's probably confusing, but if you actually think about it, generally speaking, you can work it through. Okay, so here there is a metric unit and a non-metric unit. So milligrams per minute, metric, non-metric, number. You can use the per there, which is a little different than if we go back here and say non-metric units of measure are used, so beats and minute. Okay, milligrams is also metric, but they're talking about that per day. Okay, so that can be a bit confusing for sure. 3 days per week. Again, these are going to be the things that aren't necessarily they're not going to necessarily affect patient care, whether you use a virgule or whether you use a per, for example, but just these are standards that they try to set so that we can at least avoid making sure that these are misrepresented. Okay, it is challenging, there's no doubt about that. So you can review these again all in Chapter 11, and I do have this presentation that I'm happy to send to anybody. Lana, I can send anybody this entire presentation in a PDF format. So don't have to worry about making crazy notes. Well, you can make notes, and then they could be crazy, but I will send it to you. Okay, so now continuing on, now that I've got you completely confused, do not use the virgule in place of per. Let me just move this over here. So there we go. When a prepositional phrase intervenes between the two units of measure. So you can see here that this is fairly straightforward, I think, to everybody. But it's easy to miss, and it's tricky to navigate if you're not paying attention, and if you're, like everybody else, worried about just getting the correct terms down. So you can see here, she was given 4.5 milliequivalents of potassium per liter, and he was advised to take 81 milligrams of aspirin per day. So you can see here, so you're not supposed to use the virgule in place of per when a prepositional phrase intervenes between the two units of measure. So what is a prepositional phrase that is intervening between the two units of measure? In these examples of potassium, so you have 4.5 milliequivalents of potassium, that's the prepositional phrase that's intervening, per liter. And then, of course, the of aspirin. So you would not be able to put 81 milligrams of aspirin and then a virgule per day. And when you think about it, that really makes no sense that you would. But I've seen it, and just be aware, because that actually does make sense if you think about it, and when you view it, it does make sense in a small little way that in my brain works. So, yeah. Hopefully I'm not confusing you, but it does make sense, and if you think about it and have this book open, you'll see. I think you'll agree. There's also another instance of you do not use the virgule in place of per when neither element in the expression represents a unit of measure. That is, when both elements are numeric, so both are numbers, or when there are two numeric values, should be, accompanying different units of measure. Now that's a whole lot of mumbo jumbo. I'm making up my own words. Here's an example. It's easier to see. So you see here that there are two numbers, two units, two numbers and two different units. So you can see there, so it's grams and ml, and there's a number here and a number here, a number represented. So it's not just 0.5 grams per milliliter, it's 0.5 grams per 2 milliliters. Phenobarbital, 20 milligrams per 5 milliliters. The patient was prescribed Advair per 50 BID. So you can see there that it's not the same. So you can see, although Advair, I think that one, let's just check that one. Sorry, that should be, here, let me, oops, sorry. I'm just going to, it should be this. It's 250. Pardon me, I was zooming. There we go. That makes more sense now. So see here, you can see, oh my goodness, pardon me. Advair, 250 per 50. You can see how that would be confusing. That could easily get confused. And the same as I called in a prescription for hydrotussin HD, 200 milligrams per 10 milliliters. So that makes much more sense when you see it visually, that when there are two different units there. Okay. Now, of course, the exception you can see on the bottom, and you'll see this with insulin potentially as well. I will start her on Nortrel 0.5 and then the front slash or the virgule 35 for pregnancy prevention and management of her PMS. Why is that? Because as you can see there, Nortrel 0.5/35 is the actual legally trademarked name for that particular drug. Now, I know all of you are yelling at me through your screens right now saying, oh, how are we supposed to know that? So you would know that by looking up your drug book. I'm going to answer your question, guys, in a second. And checking it out, because often, of course, it'll show that little trademark, trademarked by Judy, trademark as well in your drug book. Pardon me, as well. And if you were to look even now at your drug book, for example, if you can, you'll probably see, and I can't because I don't have mine right at my fingertips, but you can see that Nortrel 0.5/35 is actually the trademark name or version of that particular drug. Now, sorry, I think one of you asked why it wouldn't be able to be 20 milligrams per as in a virgule, because it actually says you can't use the virgule in place of per when there are two numeric values accompanying different units of measure. Okay, so that's why. So it looks okay in terms of just if you wanted to argue that, but 20 milligrams, one, and milliliters are very different units, obviously. Okay, so that's pretty simple when it comes down to it. Lana, are you still having a confused look or throwing things at your screen at me at the moment? Probably. So not really, meaning not really, you're not throwing things at me? Page 378. I don't know, 378. We're in chapter 11. Let me just look here. Let me go to Patricia's, or one of you are suggesting 378. Sorry, I'm looking down now. Okay, that's a different one. Anyway, so you can see that the rule here, oh, the Nortrell drug book. Okay. The reason why, and again, this is actually taken from the example book in the Book of Cell, the previous one. So it could well have meant that the Nortrell has even changed. But the point of this matter is essentially that if it's a legally trademark name with the virgule in it, and that could be challenging to confirm for sure, then you can use it. And you'll see often that insulin measurements, you can kind of, they often can be exceptions too, because they're often in 3070 or something like that as well. Okay. If it said, okay, Lana's asking a question, 0.5 grams per milliliter. Yeah. The question is, could you, you're asking me if you could use the per? Well, apply the rules. This rule doesn't apply to that because it doesn't have two different, it doesn't have two numeric values accompanying different units of measure. And you have a numeric, value, and you have a metric unit. I'm just going to go to the chat box here, guys. Sorry, just so I can get this. Jennifer's saying, but 70 mils per kilogram, not spacing, isn't correct, but is okay because it's only just one number. They're both metric. That's right. So it would be a space there, though, Jennifer, in terms of, so it would be 70 space ml per kg, if that's, yeah. Because, again, if you applied your rules back to the, back here, and actually we're even going to go forward and you're going to see them. But yeah, milliliters per kilogram is okay. That actually indicates that in 11.2. Yeah, if you go back and look. So we're going to move forward. And sorry, Lana is saying, so it is because the second numeric value changes everything. Yes, that's right. So the numeric value plus a unit of measure. So you got the 20, you have the 20 milligrams here, and then there's the magic little per. But then you have 5, and then you have milliliters. Two different units, two numbers, no virgule. Bye-bye. No forward slash. No go. No va. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. So when you have two different, so yes, there's numbers, that's okay. And if it had 20 milligrams per milliliter, that would be okay, but not 20 milligrams per 5 millimeter. Two numbers, two different units. I know what it means, Lana. I'm just trying to be a little funny, okay? There's a whole story with Nova about the whole meaning of the spelling, or the naming of the car in Spain, right? Nova. Anyway, okay, so let's move on. I think I've got you thoroughly confused, so I'm just going to stir up the pot even more. Here we go. Ratios. Let's go on to ratios. We're almost there, and hopefully we'll get to the test your knowledge where we've got 20 minutes and change left. So, ratios. Ratios refer to the fractional expression of relationship between one quantity and another whose value is determined by dividing the numerator, what's on top, by the denominator. Well, that sounds all well and good. Let's move on and see, let's put it to practice. Okay, so when we're talking about ratios, they are generally expressed with colons. So you can see here, use a colon in place of the word to, T-O, in the expression of a ratio. Okay, do not use a virgule, dash, hyphen, or other mark for this purpose. So when you're using it in place of the word to in the expression of a ratio, when you have numbers, you need to use a colon. So you can see here, mucoplasm 1 to 2, and that's how it will be expressed typically. Cold agglutinins 1 to 4, epinephrine 1 to 200,000. that seems fairly straightforward. Now remember, there has to be numerals involved there, okay? So you're not going to put 1 and spell out the word TO, 2. So when there's a ratio, when you're talking specifically about a ratios, you use a colon in place of the word 2 in the expression of a ratio. Patricia's saying, how do we know he is talking about a ratio? Well, that's why it's important that we determine we look at the definition. And again, so let's go back. I'm going to click this, but it's going to go back. So it refers to a fractional expression of relationship between one quantity and another. So the value, so the end up value, and this is going to be a whole different kind of lesson here, guys and gals, but if you think about it, it gets probably more complicated to think about the definition than just knowing. If you're going through your book of style and you go through this, even this chapter, you'll see where ratios are essentially, they're talking about relationship. They're not talking about 1 out of 4, for example. They're talking about 1 in relation to 4. So and the ratio itself determines the value. And so that's probably more confusing to you, but essentially what we're talking about here, like in epinephrine, it's 1 part or one element. Think of a, let's see, like a 1 thimbleful of something to 200,000 of something else. Okay, so it's not 1 in 200,000 or well, actually it would be. It wouldn't be or 1 out of 200,000. It's going to be this represents a result in itself. And I'm not explaining this very carefully, but you're going to know, or I'm not explaining it probably as well as I could, and I'll think of many ways to explain it better after I get out of here. But it's important to know, yeah, it is to know the context, and you're going to know because generally speaking, you're not going to see ratios very, very often. You're going to see them when it comes to epinephrine. You'll see that in terms of they'll use it. Doctors will dictate 1 in 200,000, 1 in 100,000, something like that. And that's just going to be something that you're going to know in context because he's talking about the epinephrine that was used for anesthesia or anesthetic and so on. And same as these two as well. They're not used very often, but when you do, you'll look it up and go immediately to your ratios because you'll see here that they're few and far between, but it's important to know when. Epinephrine, the epinephrines, the 1 in 200,000 will be ones that you'll see all the time, or 1 to 16 when they're talking about thyroid or antibodies and things like that. But it would be, excuse me, pardon me. Yeah, they're used less frequently, but it's good to know that you need to represent it as a colon when we're talking about ratios. Lana's saying, if I was baking 1 cup flour per 4 cups water, or that's right, or 1 cup flour to 4 cups water. That's right, it would be 1 to 4. Correct. Exactly. And everyone's talking household stuff. I love it. That's exactly right. Helen's saying, example 1 to 2. Another word would be 1 part of water to 2 parts of bleach. Or, wow, or maybe the opposite, Helen. I don't know what you're cleaning, but yes, that's right. You got it. So, yeah, so try not to get too bogged down with that, but I understand it's important. Yeah, that's part and parcel of understanding the context too, but hopefully. Patricia's saying, would there always be another item behind? Not necessarily, Patricia, and I'm not sure if I clearly understand the question, but I think it wouldn't necessarily be another thing behind. There will always be 2 components to a ratio, yes, but you're not getting why the proportions are different than a ratio? You can ask me the question as we go, Lana, and I'm going to, oh, sorry, why the / and oh, okay, so because it's okay, let me think about how to explain it a little differently, and I'll get back. Let me go back, but for you, Lana, but I'm gonna do that in a bit. Okay, I don't want to hijack this as well, but I'm gonna think of a better way to represent it to you. Okay, and maybe it will come more clear if we go through. So let's just do that, and we'll hopefully not confuse you more, and we can talk about it a little more. So here, when we're talking about expressed with a 2 or a hyphen, and again we're talking about ratios still, you use the words TO or a hyphen instead of a colon when expressing the ratio using words or letters instead of values or numbers. You use the colon only when expressing the values associated with the ratio. So you can see here, sorry, and this should actually be, I don't know why that didn't translate, but there we go. So you can see here, they're all words here. There are no numbers. So you can see in the examples, if you hear FEV, and you'll hear that very frequently, FEV to FVC ratio, you use the word 2 with hyphens on either side of it, okay? But you wouldn't use a colon there. So it wouldn't be represented as I:E ratio. Why? Because it says you use the colon only when expressing the values associated with the ratio. Okay, so that's just a minor thing, and you don't necessarily have to know what the ratios are, but when it's represented like this, using only words or letters, you actually have to use the word 2 and hyphens, okay? So you wouldn't use, the point is you're not going to use colons in this specific example. And of course it shows another one. However, if it was represented like this is just throwing you another complete curveball. If it says myeloid to erythroid ratio was 10 to 1. So here you can see that you need to use the actual word 2 with your hyphens because there's no numbers represented in this specific part right here. But how you actually represent the ratio is 10:1. So what does that mean? And Lana, maybe this is even helpful to clarify. The myeloid components or cells to erythroid cells, say for example, where there were 10 of them to every 1. Okay, so that's a really great example of when so here you can't use the colon because we're talking just words. But here, when the numbers are included, then you have to use that colon as part of it. So Coralie is saying, so it would be 10 myeloid to 1 erythroid if expressed that way, right? That's right. Yes. So whatever she's asking, meaning what's represented here is whatever is represented here first in word is what essentially is related to the first number that's represented in the actual numeric ratio. Yes, that's correct. That's right. That's the implied, or that's the assumption. That's right. Yep. Okay. Hopefully we're going to get through this, guys. It's 1:45. Okay, ranges. There's often confusion. Imagine confusion. Often confusion about when to use the word to, T-O, and when to use a hyphen between two numbers that describe a range of values. Okay? Yes, that's true, Christina, as well. Yeah, but it's also, you need to use it because, of course, the point is that you can't use the colon. That's the point, too. Okay, so again, ranges, often confusion about when to use the word to and when to use a hyphen between two numbers that describe a range of values. Well, here we go. Now we're talking about ranges. We're in the last part of it here. So you can use a hyphen in place of the word to in ranges, meaning something from something or something between something, if all 5 of these conditions are met. Not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but all 5 have to be met here. Okay, so, sorry. The phrases from ... like from 5 to 9, for example. So from and to, or from and through, or from 5 through 10, or between 5 and 10, for example, all those words. So from and to, from and through, or between and, if it's not used, okay, so those phrases cannot be used right off the bat. If they're used, then you know that you cannot use a hyphen. Moving right along, the second rule is decimals and or commas do not appear in the numeric values. So you couldn't use, if there's from 8.5 to 9.5, well, you couldn't use a hyphen there automatically, because why? There's a decimal. Or between 5,000 and, between 100,000 and 200,000. You couldn't use a hyphen there. Why? Because there are commas used in that number. Okay. Now, third rule, neither value contains 4 or more digits. That's pretty straightforward. Neither value is negative. Neither value is accompanied by a symbol. Okay, so +4 to +5. You're not allowed to use a hyphen there because there's a symbol involved. So each into themselves seem pretty straightforward. It's putting it to practice. Okay, so pardon me. So it says, when any of the 5 conditions is not met, yes, and it's supposed to be is, before all of you freak out at me for not having are, we're talking any, needs singular, so when any of the 5 conditions is not met, use to, T-O, or any other appropriate wording, whatever is being used, in place of a hyphen. So you can see here, when any of the 5 conditions is not met. So here, this is the example of when it's not met. Here, 3 plus to 4 plus edema, we cannot use the hyphen. Why? Because there's a symbol with these numbers. And again, 4 to 5 million, we cannot use a hyphen there. Why? Because the $ is there. Okay, so $1 million. So if they had just said 4 to 5 million, then you're okay. But the fact that it says $4 to $5 million, you can't use a hyphen. Again, because of the symbols, and the same goes here. So -25 to +48, pardon me, you can't use a hyphen. Why? Because there's a symbol. That's one of the conditions, but it's one. You cannot, all 5 of them have to be met. And you can see here, weight fluctuated between 100 and 30 pounds. Why is this not able to use a hyphen here? Because the between and, because you can see here, sorry, you're not allowed to have anything with the words between, ... and, from, to, from, through. Okay? Pretty straightforward. And again, this applies only for ranges. Ranges, okay? So let's move right on. And it actually, this just carries on, pardon me, you do not use a colon between the limits of a range. And that's very straightforward because we just don't tend to use colons. That is to say, if someone says between 80 and 125, for example, that, of course, it just makes sense, I think, to everybody, or it should, that you're not going to put 80 colon 125 to represent a range. No, because that tells us, that colon there tells us that actually, in fact, is a ratio, meaning 80 parts to 125. Okay? They just add that just to make sure that it's understood that you would not use a colon to represent a range. Okay? Everyone thoroughly confused? I think you are, because no one's asking any questions. Okay, wow. You see that? That's crazy crooked. I don't know why that is. I'm going to figure out why. That's going to drive me crazy. Oh, sorry. I don't know why it's crooked, but it is. Okay, so 11.4.2 with over or out of. Did I miss one? Yes, I did. Oh, sorry. Wow. Did I just jump a whole bunch of them? Hang on, guys. Just 1 second. I don't know what happened there. Okay, here we go. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why that's crooked. Okay, so 11.4.2 with over or out of. Again, this is, I think, where you're going to. We are getting there, and hopefully we'll have time. If I don't have time to do the testing your knowledge, I will email it to you guys as well, and we can do a little contest of sorts. Okay, when a range is combined, now remember, range, this is one that a lot of you try to apply this one, and someone asked me about it earlier, about why couldn't you have 4 out of 5 in terms of pain. You can, because this rule doesn't apply. So when a range is combined with an over or out of expression, spell out the expression to avoid being misread as a fraction. Do not use a virgule to express the relationship. So again, ranges, ranges, range, okay? Strength in the right extremity is 4 to 4 plus over 5. Not strength in the right extremity is 4 hyphen 4 plus out of 5. And the other example is she described her pain as a 5 to 6 out of 10. It has to be that way. And not she described her pain as 5 hyphen 6 out of 10. Why is that? Because it's a range and it's combined with an over or out of expression. Okay, so because it's a range, you are not allowed to use the hyphen. And you can see why visually here. That really can easily, you can see how that could easily be misread. Okay, so yeah, that's right, Corley. So it doesn't represent a fraction, because you could see if somehow, of course, you're not going to have 56 over 10, you know, if this gets lost, but you could see how it just is going to, it could create confusion and delay. For those of you who have kids, and Thomas the Tank Engine, that was for you. Jennifer's saying she's becoming deranged. Yes, that's just funny. Only one of us can be funny here, Jennifer, and it's going to be me. All right? Okay, so you can see here, again, ranges. We're talking ranges. If this had have said strength in the right extremity is 4 out of 5, that's okay, because it's not a range. It's not a range. She described her pain as 5 out of 10, then it's okay that you use 5/10. It's okay. Why? Because it's not, what? Let me hear you yell. Let me hear you. It's not a range. Okay? So this is where often people get hung up. Pain can be represented as 5/10. Or strength can be represented as 4/5. Although it could be misrepresented as certainly as a fraction. We understand that. But really, when we're talking in context, it makes sense. So when we're talking about range here, again, when a range is combined with an over or out of expression, we cannot use the hyphen. I'm going to move on just while you're thoroughly confused. Okay, now this is fairly straightforward, I think, too. When a hyphen is used to express a range, of two large numbers, express both numbers in their entirety, even if dictated in shortened form to avoid confusion. Why is that to say when a hyphen? I don't think it should say when a hyphen. Oh, I see. It's used to express a large, when it actually is used, meaning if it's used in the dictation. So, for example, here it says the dictation said platelet counts were 300 to 450,000. You can see that it was transcribed full numbers. So in using 300,000 to 450,000 and not 300 hyphen 450,000. Okay, so the point is when you have large numbers, you can't use the hyphen as it is represented in the bottom to just go 300-450,000. That would not make sense. And I think all of us would agree there. So you actually indicate the number as 300,000, including the zeros, to 450,000. Okay? So I think that's probably fairly straightforward. Excuse me. That's correct, Corley, because it says you actually, you cannot include the hyphen there. Yeah, no, that's right. It actually, because you can see how that hyphen could easily get lost there. No. That's right, Cheryl. Cheryl's saying this is how you look at, or how I look at these. If you took the 450,000 away, you have 300, right? 300 what? You have 300 nothing. That's right. So Jennifer is saying, I'm confused. Could you use 300,000 hyphen 450,000? No, because it actually says here, pardon me, although that's not entirely implied there, but it actually, for the same reason, I think really, Jennifer, that you would, that hyphen could get lost there. And I think actually there's another, oh, I know, no, you couldn't do that. Why? I'll tell you why. Because if we go back, if we go back to our rules, what does it say? It says neither value contains 4 or more digits. Okay, so no, you could not use the hyphen there. Okay. So again, this is a lot of information, and it's no wonder that certainly it gets all up there and in your head. Even I kind of forgot for a moment there. So yeah, so you couldn't use the, you have to use the word to there. Okay? Oh, here we go. Blood pressure, and we really are actually almost out of time. What I can do is, maybe this will be a continuation of another one for the next time, because I do actually have the test your skills, but we can just try to maybe just do it really quickly, and then I can just send you the test. Okay, so blood pressures, remember this, blood pressure range should be expressed consistently. Wait, that's yummy, that's yummy, that's yumminess to our ears, using either to or a hyphen between the ranges of the diastolic pressures and systolic pressures. Look it up. But these should not be combined in a virgule construction, as they might be misunderstood. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Dictated was, blood pressure was 100 to 120 over 70 to 80. What was transcribed is this. Yep, there will be a part 2. Blood pressure was 100-120, but you still have to include the over 70 to 80, or it can be 100 with the word to, 120 over 70 to 80, so a lot of you use that one, or it can be 100-120 over 70 to 80. I guess these are pretty much the same, or just the word range is added there. I'm not sure why that is. But what is not acceptable, this is what's important here, people. What's not acceptable are these two. You cannot use that virgule to represent the word over. That's the bottom line here. Okay, you can represent the 100 to 120 with a hyphen or with two. You can see that either are acceptable, so all of you can quit stressing about that. You can use the hyphen or two, but the kicker is that you can't use the virgule for the over here, okay? Because then it just, you just can't. It says you can't. So you cannot use it, represent the virgules here and then just use it to. No, you can't do it that way. You can represent it with your hyphens or the two for the ranges, but you must use the word over, okay? That's right. This looks actually confusing. Makes no sense. Okay. And okay, you know what? So we are running out of time. So what I'll do is I'll actually email you this PowerPoint, and I will also email you the questions, which actually is a test your knowledge. And you can email me back if you want, but they're fairly straightforward. It's essentially the application of all these rules, and I'm going to show it to you. Yeah, see, there's some really good stuff here. Maybe what we can do, I don't know when I do my next one, but I would love to continue this and include the test as well. But certainly I can email you this presentation, and you can follow it through on your own. I'm happy to do that. And as well, I might even be nice and send you the answer key as well. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us. I know we're a minute over. I apologize, but thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to actually go back to my very first page here. Here we go. Whoops. And I will email anybody who's asked me for it for sure. And if you, I do have my comments here as well, or my email address as well. So you can email me directly if you want me to send you the slideshow in the presentation, pardon me. Okay. I'm going to just stop showing my screen here for a moment. There we go. Okay. There you go. You can see my screen. Yeah, so you can email me. That's my CanScribe email. So you can email me if you want the presentation. I will definitely email you back with the PDF, and you can have some fun with that. So thanks, everybody. Do email me. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a little bit, but you can go. Please fly be free. I'm sorry if I've confused you. You can email me with questions as well. Okay, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon. I'll let you know when my next webinar is, but it'll probably be in about a month or maybe 3 weeks. I'm not sure. Thank you. Ciao, everybody. Have a great day.